When you talk about bumping a player, it's pretty much
great courage. One that says the bump is dead, that's how you deliver it.
What is going on, YouTube universe? My name is Trent and welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, where we discuss everything Australian rules football. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to hit rewind a little bit, because while round 15 has just wrapped up for the 2024 AFL season, I still haven't dropped the podcast for round 14 yet, because shit has happened that has thrown my schedule way off track, and I already missed out on uploading the previous podcast, so I didn't want to kind of go back to back and go without. So better to be late than sorry, right? If you're unfamiliar with the Round Recap podcast, essentially what it is after a round of football goes down, I sit here in front of a camera and talk about each and every game, break it down, giving my viewpoints on who I think were the better players on ground, talking about any controversial things that happened, talk about the umpiring and the state of, which up until this point, let's face it, has been pretty fucking atrocious this year. Any injuries or anything else of note to be spoken about, it's all broken down within the recap. I mean, that it's in the name, Round Recap. If you don't get the picture out of that, I don't know where you're going to draw any assumptions from. But round 14 saw a handful of games, 6 that is, because the bye rounds were still well and truly in effect. And if you've been following the content I upload on this channel, you would know that the byes have been the bane of my existence this year. I hated that we had a set of byes at the beginning of the season. I hate that we've followed through with the mid-season byes. I would probably rather, come the middle of the year, we take a week or 2 off and give all teams a fresh start. That way there's no complaints about some teams having 2 byes in a year before one team has 1 bye. They really need to nail down their structuring and fixturing when it comes to having 2 sets of byes. And if that is something they're going to follow through with every year moving forward, they need to do it a hell of a lot fucking better than what they did for round 14. Because round 14, although some teams came off of the bye and you would have thought it would have set them up for success, kind of backfired and went the other way around, which is actually quite surprising. But round 14 kicked us off at the Gabba with Brisbane hosting St Kilda. 2 teams on 2 sides of the spectrum. You've got St Kilda, who have been lauded this year as a very uninspiring, dull football team to watch, delivering some quote-unquote unwatchable, boring games of football. And that has not just come from my mouth, that's come from the mouth of some commentators and some media experts and a lot of the AFL supporter base, especially given St Kilda's inability this year to find avenue to score. And then you've got Brisbane, who have dropped a couple of games at the Gabba this year, but are starting to find their feet, and they're starting to kind of ride the wave of momentum up into the top 8, because the top 8 at this point in time is still very much open to a handful of teams. Top 4 is probably out of reach for some, but within the grasp of some other teams. But the top 8 in general, probably, I'd say 6th right through to maybe 12th, are well in contention for that push and pull of that final, 3 to 4 spots. Brisbane, though, managed to keep their season revival alive with a 20-point win over St Kilda, who, quite surprisingly, would leave this game with their heads held high. And I think St Kilda fans should. And I know it's kind of contradictory to the fact that, fans and teams go to games to win. Obviously, they're looking for the 4 premiership points, they leave with the W, but considering St Kilda managed to get 16 goals, 10 on the scoreboard for a team that has been, as I said, discussed openly this season as a team that has struggled to find avenue to score, is a huge win for them. It's now just a matter of having that consistency to be able to push forward, put wins on the board, and contend against the better teams. St Kilda may have scored their 16-10. Brisbane, however, were very fluent moving the ball forward with 19-12 of their own, and it really could have gone either way. I mean, a couple of goals that were missed from St Kilda could have easily turned the tide in this game. Similarly for Brisbane, a couple of goals missed could have just blown this margin out of proportion. Now, it is important to note that at three-quarter time of this game, I think Brisbane were up by about 37 points, and you would have probably thought at that point, okay, 6 goals, done and dusted, they're going to run away with this game. St Kilda came out firing in that final term and brought it back to within 7 points, and I think that would have had a lot of Brisbane fans very shaky. Then Logan Morris, I believe his name is, a young kid for Brisbane who I really rate as a player. If I was Brisbane, I would be more interested in seeing the development of Logan Morris over investing time in Eric Hipwood. And I think Eric Hipwood is on a salary that is incredibly overs and undeserving of the talent that he's dished up, because he is so inconsistent. I mean, he has games where he pops up every now and again and he'll kick 3 or 4 and everyone will say, this is why he's getting paid good money. And then he'll play like my grandmother, who had Parkinson's but is now also dead and can't get a touch. So it's very, very interesting to see this forward dynamic, and when one player is kind of now dropping for Brisbane, you have another elevate, and you've got these young kids that are now coming through. You know, Kai Lohman has been a revelation for Brisbane this year. Logan Morris, as I said, and they've needed these players to step up in the absence of Lincoln McCarthy and the other players, you know, Darcy Gardner, that have all gone down with their ACLs this year. Bruce Revel has been a revelation in itself as well, you know, the mid-season draftee. It's very interesting to note that Brisbane have had these young kids be able to elevate a somewhat already premiership contending list, and you've got to really hand it to them. I mean, they come within 7 points, St Kilda that is, of a 37-point drop at three-quarter time, and then Logan Morris steadies the ship, and as a first-year player with only a handful of games under his belt, kicks a goal and manages to stem that kind of flow. And then Joe Danaher goes back and kicks his 5th. Charlie Cameron then goes on to kick another goal, and they end up running away with a very handy win. But it's good to see players like Logan Morris taking the time to just own the moment for themselves. So many young kids kind of panic and, you know, they'll spray it out on the full or they'll look to pass, but he had enough composure within himself to just take the kick and know the game was on the line. I really have a lot of admiration for young talent that do that. It's going to be a shame when looking at the players and how they performed this week and deciding who my best on ground for the MVP award for this year is, because there were some players who played absolutely out of their skin, and unfortunately they're not going to be good enough to rack up any votes from myself, which could be controversial because we had a ton of goal kickers and kind of learnt my lesson early by not giving goal kickers their just desserts when it comes to, you know, votes and recognition in general. But Jack Higgins for St Kilda had 14 disposals at 85% efficiency. He ended up kicking 5 goals, 1. He had 8 score involvements. He laid 2 tackles. But that's not going to be good enough for him to be in calculations for the votes. You know, Max King, he has a game of 3 goals. Mitch Owens has a game of 2 goals. Again, though, not good enough to get the votes. It was very hard, and obviously when it comes to discussing who I think is best on ground, it is always opinion-based. So for anybody watching these videos that do go out, do let me know in the comment section down below if you think I've made a slip and I've not discussed a player that really deserves to be spoken about. A player who I would have loved to have thrown in the votes this week purely for his influence on the game, and when you look at his stat count, doesn't have much stats to boast, and I'm not going to say his name, but this player for the game had only 9 disposals. He ran at 77% disposal efficiency. He laid 4 tackles, had 4 score involvements. He had 1 goal assist, only took 2 marks, only had 3 clearances, but this man kept dual Brownlow medalist Lachie Neale down to one of his lowest performing games of the season and took really influence out of it. Lachie Neale only had 20 disposals at 75% efficiency. He had 7 clearances, had 2 marks for the game, 2 goal assists and 4 score involvements, didn't lay a tackle. And that man that kept him quiet was Marcus Windhager, who is now starting to bring about a conversation of whether the old school tagger is now becoming incredibly relevant in the game again. I mean, when you think of taggers of the games of old, as much as I hate to talk about him, you think of Kane Corns, you think of Ryan Crowley, you think of Cameron Ling. These players being able to lock down, top talent from the opposition and really take them out of the game. I think Marcus Windhager would walk away with a 9 disposal game of his own, knowing that he's kept Lachie Neale's influence to only 20 disposals and really taking that out of the game. And the only thing I would probably argue is there seems to be no lack of watching how these taggers kind of operate around the ground, or how players are being dealt with off the ball when the umpires aren't directly looking, because the umpires started to clue on to the fact that Marcus Windhager was very hands-on with Lachie Neale around the contest, trying to nullify his, input and his impact, but then started coughing up a lot of free kicks. And once the umpires clued onto it, it kind of killed that buzz a little bit, because Lachie Neale was starting to pick up all these cheapy free kicks because he was being held or he was grabbed too high or whatever the case may be. But it's good to see players like Marcus Windhager getting spoken about in the media when it comes to nullifying impact like that, because I feel there is room for the tagger to return. As a Richmond fan, I would love to see one of our young kids trialed in that kind of role. Tyler Sonsie would be one I'd love to throw into the mix, because I'd just love to see him get more midfield time. We've seen Marlon Pickett for Richmond play a negating role against Christian Petrarca in the past, which worked, but I mean, Pickett's at the back end of his career, probably doesn't get extended after this season, so it'd be interesting to see how that goes. But really loved how Marcus Windhager went about it this weekend, or last weekend rather, or even the weekend before. Depends on when this fucking video drops. I am so out of the loop, and I do apologize that this video did come out late. I went and had a bit of a fall. Later on found out I fractured my left ankle in multiple places, so I've been off my foot. I've been trying to get stuff done. So physically, I'm kind of broken down. I'm so mentally exhausted, it's not funny, so it kind of pushed everything kind of onto the back burner. But hey, as I said, better later than never, and we're discussing it now. Before I move on to my 3-2-1 for the Best On Ground MVP award scenario that I do every podcast, I want to give a shout out to Jack Sinclair from St Kilda, another player who unfortunately played a great game of football, but I'm kind of looking past, and probably a bit controversial to do so, considering he had 32 disposals at 78%, 4 clearances, took a mark, 1 goal assist, 7 score involvements, and 2 tackles. I don't know, I just thought that the 3 players I did choose, who, yes, are all going to be from Brisbane, all had bigger influences at different periods of time. And if this is the first video you are catching of this format on my channel, when it comes to the MVP award that I do the votes for, it is broken down like a Brownlow system. 3 votes for Best On Ground, 2 votes, and then 1 vote, subsequently after that. And I want to start talking about now, before I do that, just like I did then, some players that I think had influence on the game, but didn't have as much influence as the ones that are going to get votes. And it's always contentious. As I said, if you don't agree, you think I fucked up somewhere, let's talk about it in the comments. But the 1 vote for me this week goes to Joe Danaher. 20 disposals at 70%, 375 meters gained. He had 1 clearance. He had 12 marks, because obviously he plays a little bit of in the ruck as well. But he also not managed to get himself the 5 goals won for the game, but also had 9 direct score involvements as well, outside of the goals that he had kicked. So he was able to not only hit the scoreboard himself, but set his teammates up, and I think that set him apart from a Jack Higgins, who also kicked 5 goals. If it wasn't for Higgins in a certain period of time, Brisbane could have blown this game out of proportion, but Higgins popped up, and I think he kicked 2 in a minute and started really getting everybody up and about. Still spewing we got rid of him. I would have loved to have kept him at Richmond, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. We move on to the second Best On Ground, the 2 votes this week. I'm giving it to Dane Zorko. What a season this guy's having. I mean, he could really go on and play another couple of years at Brisbane, and I would really love to see him do so, because he's having a year that I think should have him within all Australian calculations off of the halfback. He had 30 disposals at 76% efficiency, 755 meters gained, 10 contested possessions of his 30, He had 9 marks, 1 goal assist. He had 9 score involvements, and he laid 3 tackles. He has been in and about for Brisbane's best on ground almost every week. But this week was hard to look past Hugh McCluggage for best on ground. 26 disposals, 80% disposal efficiency, 535 metres gained. 8 of his 26 were contested. He had 3 clearances, took 11 marks around the ground. He kicked 2 goals, 1 for himself. He had the 1 goal assist, 12 score involvements, and he laid 3 tackles. As comprehensive as a game that you are going to see a player have. He's the type of player that unfortunately lacks the consistency to kind of string it together. He'll have 2 or 3 games where he blows it out of the water and then he goes missing. If he could really put together a full season of a body of work like he put here, he could be a Smoky for a Brownlow one year. And that's probably a huge call, given there's plenty of talent at Brisbane that would be taking way too many votes off him. But I really love seeing Hugh McCluggage fly when he's at his best. There was some rumour going around that Richmond were interested in picking him up at the end of this year, but he's obviously gone on to re-sign with Brisbane. Broke my heart because I would have loved to have lured him down here, but hey, who would probably want to fucking get traded to Richmond at this point with the year Richmond have had? Moving on, before I start drowning my sorrows, Bulldogs took on Fremantle at Marvel Stadium in a game where Fremantle came off of the bye, and you would have thought that that fresh kind of mind and body would have had them in good stead after a very, very big win of 90 plus points the week before. And we were wrong. This was an absolute fucking demolition of Fremantle. And I mean, it's no fault to their own. Fremantle kicked 12 goals, 10 for the game. 82 points is normally in a game of football good enough to get a fucking win. But when your opposition kicks double the amount of goals, 23-11, 149, defeats 82, the Bulldogs just continue to come out and blow my mind. And again, from both of these teams, really, I feel we get left in limbo because we don't know which version of the Bulldogs and which version of Fremantle we are going to get each and every week. These two play, you know, against each other, coming off of different outcomes. The a couple of weeks prior, as I said, Fremantle coming off of 90 plus points win over Melbourne in the middle of nowhere. Would have thought that would have given enough momentum and enough up and aboutness there at the club to get the job done and absolutely get fucking belted down here. They could go on and win, you know, their next game quite convincingly. The Bulldogs, on the other hand, they get a big win here, despite having the bye in round 15, could get absolutely smacked come round 16. So, I don't know. These two teams are probably thereabout for pushing for that top 8 kind of finish, but we don't know where they're going to fall, given the inconsistencies we have seen. I mean, Luke Beveridge still playing Caleb Daniel out of the tactical sub or whatever you want to fucking call it, still does my head in. I don't understand why a player of that caliber, even if they're down on form a little bit, would be used as the sub. I mean, Caleb Daniel is the type of player who brings a lot of X factor, I feel, to the Bulldogs. So feel free to fucking discuss this with me, but I just feel that giving him a full run would improve any potential, downness on form, giving him a decent chance to kind of get involved. I still feel there's going to be an exodus at Bulldogs at the end of the year with a few players. I wouldn't be surprised if Caleb Daniel puts his hand up and leaves. Would not be surprised to see if Jack McRae's name's floated around as well. Bailey Dale's probably settled back in a little bit, but I think he might be one. And then there's still conjecture about what's going on with Rory Lobb. You know, Tim English could still very well put his name up. It's going to be a very interesting watch. The big thing out of this game, obviously, for Fremantle fans, was Michael Walters going down with a hamstring. It's never good to see a player go down, but a player who has been so incredibly, I'm losing the words. I'm kind of lost for words here, but I'm just trying to say, for the player like Sonny Bill to have the influence he has had on Fremantle, not just as a player, but just as a human being, it can't be understated. He'll go down as one of their best small forwards to ever play for them. Very well in calculations, especially when he was at his peak. So sad to see him go down. will it affect Fremantle moving forward? I don't know. But yeah, I'm just a little bit dumbfounded by this result. Kind of didn't expect it to go down this way. I really thought the Bulldogs would win, but it was going to be a closer contest. And in parts, just the demolition, especially after half time, was just so glaring. I mean, to kick 5-1 in the second quarter, and then you have all the scoring that happened on both sides of three-quarter time, including the goal of the year contender that Marcus Bontempelli ended up dropping. It shows that the Bulldogs' best is good enough to compete for a premiership. But then, as I said, we get other weeks where they don't dish it up, and I don't know whether that is a mechanical fault from the head coach. If you haven't been following this podcast series, I think you'd know this year that I've got a bit of a conspiracy theory against Luke Beveridge. I really don't like him as a coach, and I think Bulldogs will be better off without him. I want to kind of try to move on so we don't dwell on the coaches all too much. When it comes to the players this week, it was kind of a little bit more straightforward when choosing. There were a couple of players that kind of shocked me a little bit with their involvement, but I think when you look at how much they ended up winning by, and you see the three players I am going to give the votes to, you can't look past the three I did, but definitely got to give special mentions to players like Bailey Dale. Has 30 disposals at 80%. He takes 7 marks, 12 score involvements, lays to 2 tackles. Lockie Bramble, 30 disposals at 93%. Has 10 marks for the game, kicks 1 goal, has 9 score involvements and 4 tackles. Could have probably been within vote calculation. He's probably the one that's stiff to miss. Caleb Sarong in a losing attempt, he still has 28, has 9 clearances, 4 score involvements, lays 3 tackles. Hayden Young does his usual thing. He has 26, but only ran at 46%, so it was down on disposal for him, and I think that's where mechanically they kind of broke down around the ground. Fremantle, just their players weren't having as much impact as they usually have. Like Caleb Sarong's 28 was only at 67%. You look down the list and there's some other players that kind of really dropped off. Like Luke Ryan normally has a decent amount of marks and uses the ball well out of that back line, but he only has 15 for the game, takes 6 marks. Luke Jackson only manages 19 disposals for the game. He only takes 4 marks around the ground. He only had 16 hitouts for the game. To put in perspective, Rory Lobb had 7, so he didn't really have much input in the ruck at all. The one vote I'm giving out this week goes to Adam Treloar, who I feel has had a very underrated season. They dropped recently the mid-season list that has been revealed, basically, of every single player that has been discussed from every club for potential All-Australian inclusion. Adam Treloar's name was not under the Bulldogs headliner, and I don't understand why. This guy's had almost, he's had well and truly close enough to almost 30 possessions a game. In my opinion, has been the Bulldogs' most consistent and best player this season, and that trumps Marcus Bontempelli. It's very weird to see someone who has had as much influence on a team as Treloar has not getting his just desserts, but he gets the one vote this week. 27 disposals, 81% efficiency, 456 metres gained. 7 of his 27 were contested. 5 clearances, 3 marks, 1 goal, 2 goal assists, 14 score involvements, and 6 tackles. Probably what got him over the line for the vote was the fact that it was 14 score involvements and 6 tackles. I love players that are defensively sound. Probably nitpicking though, considering Lockie Bramble had 9 score involvements and had 4 tackles. 2 votes this week goes to Tom Liberatore, and I think they really missed his input within that midfield mix. 28 disposals at 71% efficiency, 292 metres gained, purely because most of his disposals were handballs. 15 of his 28 were contested. He had 10 clearances, 6 marks, 2 behinds, 10 score involvements, and 5 tackles. And best on ground, he'll get the 3 votes for the Brownlow this game too. Marcus Bontempelli, 30 disposals at 70%, 682 metres gained, 13 of his 30 were contested, 7 clearances, 8 marks, 3 goals, 3 goal assists, 15 score involvements, and 5 tackles. Really starting to come into that Brownlow form we have seen him have in recent years. Could he be a late runner for the Brownlow this year? Who knows? But as far as that weekend went, he was well and truly one of the better performers. Richmond hosted Hawthorn at the MCG in a game that was Dustin Martin's 300th. He is only one of very few that have managed to hit 300 games for Richmond. I'm hoping he will finish as a one club man. I think the interview that he had post game, despite the outcome, was incredibly emotional. It definitely brought about some tears to my eye just to see him so thankful for the Richmond crowd, thankful for Richmond as a club, and you know, to have 90,000+ rock up, and despite Richmond losing to Hawthorn like they did, still every single Richmond supporter in that stadium up on their feet, clapping a champion, seeing Dusty do that lap around the ground, thanking the fans, to see him cheered off the ground at the end of the game was something so special. And I don't think, unless Scott Pendlebury breaks 400 games for Collingwood, I don't think we're going to see a spectacle for a milestone game like that again. There's been a lot of conjecture whether or not that was Dustin Martin's last game of football, given how emotionally driven that speech was. You know, he turned around and said how much he bleeds for the club, he loves the club. It's the type of speech that kind of informed me, at least, that if he does choose to end his career this year, it'll be as a one club man. It kind of put maybe some trade rumors to rest, because it definitely sounded like I'm not going anywhere. If I play on, I'll stay here. If not, I'm done. Obviously not in those words, but kind of, you could just kind of read between the lines, I feel. Yeah, very emotional. And obviously the script couldn't have been written any better for this game, with Dusty kicking the opening goal of the game from 50 in very Dusty-like fashion, setting the crowd on fire. Unfortunately, whichever bastard wrote the script for this game wrote a fucking horror story, because Richmond ended up going down in the end by 8 goals, 48 points, and I was left in dismay. I just couldn't understand where the lack of effort kind of dropped off to. We've seen Richmond the week before defeat Adelaide on the road. We saw, even though they lost against Geelong, even though they have lost against Essendon, you know, we have seen some emphatic effort ever since Uze's kind of moved from up in the coach's box down to the dugout, the interchange. There's been a new life kind of breathed into that team. Getting to see him one-on-one with the players really shows me that Richmond are on the right track, and Uze is the man to do it. It just kind of not only blows my mind that Richmond allowed Hawthorn to get off the chain like they did, but Hawthorn won 4 in a row, I think, and currently as it stands, sit 1 win out of the top 8 and are now within finals contention. Who would have thought? I mean, I laughed off ideas at the start of the year where people were saying Hawthorn could push for the top 8, but they've got a really good mix of kids here that are really starting to put it together. And you look at trades like Mabior Chol from the Gold Coast back down to Hawthorn, people kind of laughed that off. Chol was one of the better performers on the ground this week. It was hard to watch. It was just hard to get my head around the fact that we had the team that could win, but Hawthorn's youth and their ball use around the contest was just so much cleaner. And you know, this is a young team that have been slowly building, and I've been saying it for weeks and weeks and weeks. Even last year, when I was doing all my tipping videos over on my gaming channel and I would discuss football, I always said that when the chemistry with this team kind of finally snaps together, they're going to be absolutely flying. And to think that this year could be the year that they pop up as the unexpected dark horse of the competition to play finals, probably really exciting for Hawthorn fans. And I'm really excited for them, given the kind of harshness of what they've had to deal with over recent years. I just really couldn't see this run from Hawthorn coming, and it's blown my mind. But again, I think at the end of the day, as a Richmond man, I kind of benched the loss eventually. Like it kind of affected me more because I would have thought the boys would have dug a bit deeper for somebody who is regarded by many as one of the best players of the modern era. He'll go down as a Hall of Famer. He'll eventually be locked in as a Hall of Fame legend. There's not many people that'll ever replicate what Dusty has done. And they can try to say Harley Reid is the next Dustin Martin, but there's a Brownlow and a few Norm Smiths and everything to be won in between to get to that level. But Hawthorn were vastly impressive on the day, which breaks my heart as a Richmond supporter, but as a neutral supporter, kind of looking at it from different angles, incredibly good to watch. And there were a lot of players that kind of got up and about and really started making some waves. Jaden Short finally showing a little bit for Richmond, had 25 disposals running at 92%. Daniel Rioli, 24 disposals at 79%. Will he get traded to the Gold Coast at the end of the year? I don't know. Vlosten has a game where he takes himself 9 marks defensively. Still, I feel should be in all-Australian contention, but hey, who knows? Massimo D'Ambrosio continues to show he's one of the better recruits of the season. With 23 disposals at 78% efficiency, takes the 9 marks himself, 5 scorer involvements. Jarman Impey, Carl Amon, Will Day, all these players really having input in and around the ground, and it was hard to kind of lock in the 3-2-1 for this game. And I think some people might be a little bit thrown, because I've seen a lot of people saying that, Amon should have been getting in the votes with some people. Like, because I watch other content creators who do stuff like this when it comes to giving out their ideas for votes and best on ground, and normally get dragged by some of the people they decide to choose, which kind of tells me in the back of my mind I'm going to be undergoing the same, which is why I always open the floor to you guys at home to comment down below. But the 3-2-1 I've gone with in this particular game, I think do stand out a cut above the rest. The one vote I'm giving to Jai Newcomb, 26 disposals at 73% efficiency, 354 metres gained, 12 of his 26 were contested, 4 clearances, 8 marks, 1 goal, 11 score involvements with the 2 tackles. The 2 votes, despite the 40-plus point loss, I'm giving to Tim Taranto, probably one of his best, and I'm glad to have him back. 33 disposals at 63%, a little bit down on disposal efficiency, but hey, he's never been really all that great with disposal efficiency. 285 metres gained, 15 of his 33 were contested, 8 clearances, 6 marks, 1 goal, 7 score involvements, and 5 tackles, and best on ground in my eyes was James Sicily, the captain. 33 disposals at 81%, 881 metres gained, 6 of his 33 were contested, 1 clearance, 15 marks, 3 score involvements, and 1 tackle. It was just his ability to shut Tom Lynch out of the game, even though Tom Lynch was only, fresh back from injury. I think we all thought he would struggle a little bit, and historically, he does get scragged a little bit behind the play by James Sicily, but hey, James Sicily got the better of him, had 33 disposals, 15 marks, most of which would have all have been intercepts, because Richmond fell into the habit of just kicking the ball long, looking for Lynch. I thought he was very much so best on ground. I'm going to move on from this game. Before I get emotional thinking about the fact that Richmond couldn't stand up tall for one of the greatest Tigers to ever play the game. We had Adelaide, down in Adelaide Oval, host Sydney in a game that was rather interesting, because I was out at the time that this game was being played, kind of trying to keep up to date on the phone, and I think at one point I looked at it and Adelaide were only 2 points up, and I think it would have been about three-quarter time. And I turned around and I was talking to a friend of mine who is a Sydney supporter, and I turned around and I said, oh, look, they might only be 2 points down, but I'm telling you right now, Sydney are going to bounce back. Sydney have this in the bag. Now, to think that late in the second quarter, heading into three-quarter time, the Crows led by 23 points. You then think about the fact that late in the third quarter, they were up by 16 points. As I said, they took a couple of point lead into that three-quarter break. But Sydney would come out in the final quarter to kick the next 10 goals of the game to win by 6 goals was so impressive, and it was on the back of Joel Marty kicking 9 goals. Now, a lot of people, including media experts and journalists and, panelists and everything else on like the Sunday Footy Show and things like that, have all kind of got stuck into Longmire about the fact that he took Joel Marty off the field and denied him a haul of 10 because he was on fire. I personally don't understand, if a player is running as hot as Marty was, why you would take him off the field. Why would you deny him that kind of career-defining moment? Because 9 goals is the biggest haul he's ever had. It was almost Lance Franklin-like in the way how he kind of presented and was kicking his goals. And not since Lance Franklin have we seen somebody come close to kicking 10 goals for Sydney. So it kind of speaks volumes to the conversation points that we have had about Sydney this year. And the fact that I feel the best thing for Sydney was Lance Franklin retiring, because now it opens up opportunity for Logan McDonald and Joel Marty and, Papley, Warner, Heaney, these all type of players to now be go-to avenues instead of getting the ball and instantly thinking in my mind, where's Lance? We have to get the game ball to Buddy because he's the only one who can do damage forward half of the ball. And this is now Sydney's 9th win in a row. They are now 12-1. The only loss they have had is that blip on the radar to Richmond, which I'm still going to fucking die on my hill this year and say, hey, if any team beat who is clearly the premiership favourites at this point in time, it was my boys at full strength. It's just hard to see where this next loss for Sydney is going to come from. It really is. And do they go up until finals with only that one loss? Is this going to be one of the most dominant performances from a team that we have seen in a very long time? Is this going to be a turnaround from the grand final smacking they got from Geelong a few years ago, and they finally walk away with the premiership that they hunted down that year? It's all pointing in that direction. I don't see where it could be going at any other point, in this point in time. And on the flip side, again, Adelaide, the conversation point just talking about how disappointing their season has been this year. Like, I have a running joke with my mate Damo, who gives us the multis and stuff for, the tipping videos here on this channel. His cousins with Richard Douglas, who used to play for Adelaide. He played in the grand final appearance against Richmond, I do believe. Or he could have retired the year before. I'm not entirely sure. But I've always made the running joke that ever since Richard Douglas has retired, Adelaide have gone downhill. Actually, he did play in the grand final, I think, because ever since then, they've gone downhill. And that's a joke that I can run with this year, because it's obviously been egg on the faces of a lot of people that thought Adelaide were really going to be challenging for a top 8 spot. They have been probably one of the most underperforming teams this year when it comes to expectation versus reality. And I don't understand where it comes from. And I know they've been missing players, through injury, but they gained players back. I mean, they got Isaac Rankin back in this game, and a lot of people would have thought that just his influence around the ground alone could have been enough to influence Adelaide to a win. But it's, as I said, it's hard to back against them. It's hard to work out when their next loss is going to come. And you look at some of the numbers that these Adelaide Crows are having, and you question how there can be a 40-point disparity at the end of the game. Rory Laird always works his ass off for Adelaide. He has 34 disposals at 79%, 15 contested of the 34, has 5 clearances, takes 6 marks, 6 tackles, 6 score involvements. Mitchell Hinge out of defence has 33 at 78%. He takes 8 marks for the game. He's laying 5 tackles. Lockie Scholl has 27 disposals. He takes 7 marks. He's laying tackles. He's got score involvements on the board. Rankin comes in. Rankin manages to kick 2 goals on return. Sets up a couple as well. Lays a few tackles. He has 18. Jake Saligo has 19. Jordan Dawson had a down game with only 17 disposals. And then after that, it kind of drops off. The disparity between Laird and Mitchell Hinge and Lockie Scholl, and then you just see the drop off from there. It's not good, especially when you look at the fact that players like Brodie Grundy, a ruckman, had 31 disposals for the game. Isaac Heaney has 29. Errol Goulden gets best on ground with 35 disposals. Justin McInerney has 22. Taylor Adams has 22. Rowbottom has 21. Warner and Jordan both have 20. Papley has 19 as a player who normally plays deep forward. It's just mind-boggling to think that Sydney are so evenly spread. So when it comes to the votes this week, yes, it is going to be a Sydney-dominated set of votes. And this one, again, was very hard for me to dish out because I feel bad for not including Brodie Grundy, considering he popped off. Let me just run through the stats of Brodie Grundy for those of you that are probably going to drag me for not giving him a vote this week. 31 disposals, but he ran at 38% disposal efficiency. That's what killed him for me. He had 24 contested of the 31, 49 hitouts, 9 clearances, 3 marks. He kicked 2 behinds. Had he kicked the 2 goals, maybe would have been in calculation. 8 score involvements and 2 tackles. The one vote I did give out was to Isaac Heaney. 29 disposals at 65%, 565 metres gained. 8 of the 29 were contested. 5 clearances, 8 marks, 2 goals, 1 goal assist, 11 score involvements, and 3 tackles. Now, best on ground, even though I said he put in a best on ground performance, Errol Goulden gets the 2 votes for me. He had 35 disposals. He ran at 54% disposal efficiency, which isn't really all that great for him, but he still racked up a fucking heap of it. 13 of the 35 was contested. 10 clearances, 3 marks, 2 behinds, 1 goal assist, 10 score involvements, and 6 tackles. Best on ground. If he doesn't get best on ground for this haul, then there's something wrong. Definitely is going to go to Joel Amadi, who played the game of his life. Had 10 disposals. He ran at 90% efficiency. 6 of the 10 were contested. He took 7 marks for the game. He kicked 9 goals, 1. He had 10 score involvements, obviously completely off of his own boot, and he laid 6 tackles for the game. I just feel when a player kicks that bag, you have to give him best on ground, surely, especially when at the end of the day, he's kicked the winning bag off of his own boot. They went on to kick the last 10 goals of the game. He's kicked 9 of the 16. When a player kicks almost half your score, give him fucking best on ground and throw away the key. I thought we had seen it all this year when we saw Port Adelaide come back from the brink against Hawthorn to steal the win with only 2 seconds left on the clock. But the comeback that happened from Collingwood against North Melbourne at Marvel Stadium, I think might just trump that, especially given the fact that it was shrouded in controversy. Don't we love the taste of controversy? North Melbourne came out and were, from the get-go, the better team straight out the gates. It was almost like Collingwood went into this game a little bit too overconfident. That, you know, there was rumour going around during the week that Nick Dacos might not get up and play, and I started getting the thought process of, we're only playing North Melbourne, so we don't have to play our better players. We can give them a rest. Thank fuck they played Nick Dacos, because I have not seen a more dominant single quarter performance this season from any player in the competition like Nick Dacos had in the last quarter of this game. North Melbourne were 54 points clear. They were 9 goals ahead, and it did not look like at any point in time they were going to be losing this game. Collingwood, the reigning premiers, back within top 4 and looking like getting absolutely dismantled by a team that has only managed to pick up 1 win for the season. And it just started going downhill from there. It just started to roll on down. Collingwood would kick a couple of goals. North Melbourne would stem the flow and kick 1 back. Collingwood would then kick 2 or 3. North Melbourne would try to send 1 back. It's hard to imagine coming back from a 9-goal loss when Collingwood have the likes of Brodie Myercheck, Dan McStay, Jamie Elliott, and Mason Cox all out of that forward 50. Bobby Hill stands up tall and kicks 5 goals off his own boot in one of the better performances that we have seen since that grand final performance. Has easily taken mark of the year, I feel anyway. I rate his mark better than the Jamie Elliott mark we saw earlier in the season. And it really, I don't know how this again is a reflection. Is this a reflection of North Melbourne's inability to maintain a 9-goal lead, or are we speaking more volumes on how Collingwood came back? It's kind of one of those double-edged swords conversations. I definitely feel you can't understate the comeback from Collingwood, but then again, on the flip side, how did Collingwood ever allow North Melbourne to be 9 goals clear? It's very... Let me know what you feel in the comments down below. I think that's the best way to handle it. I mean, the controversy that came out of this game, and there was a few, because there's been talking points now as to whether Nick Dacos gets officiated differently from other players, because there have been periods that we have seen him afforded more time to get rid of the ball when being tackled, and not being held accountable for holding the ball when other players have been, or getting a cheeky throw that isn't called a throw, it's called play on. Bailey Scott takes a mark late in this game to potentially propel the ball forward for North Melbourne to kick a winning score. He should have been probably paid a 50-metre penalty, given the fact that Sidebottom and McCreary both encroached over that kind of protected zone. The umpire didn't play it. Bailey Scott plays on anyway and fucks off with the ball. The umpire calls play on. We have seen less paid 50s. We have seen Noah Cumberland take one step after a mark closer and pinned. We've seen Shea Bolton honestly thinking he's manning the mark properly and gets one paid against him straight away. Just obviously 2 Richmond examples, but it's easier to give as a Richmond supporter, fresh in my mind. But yeah, it's very, very interesting to note that, Lachie Schultz as a small forward kicks 4, Bobby Hill kicks 5. It was the smaller forwards for Collingwood that really rose to the occasion, really stood up tall. I can't get my head around the fact I was listening to it on the radio. I was in the car, and I don't think I have ever been so excited about a comeback. Like, as a neutral, I go into these games, with no preconceived notions. I obviously make a tip, so I was following Collingwood in this game purely because I tipped Collingwood to win. So the fact that they were 9 goals down and I'd given up hope thinking I'd just fumbled a tip, every time they'd edge it closer back, I'd start fucking getting behind them and cheering like I was an actual Collingwood supporter. And I think that's great for football. When you find yourself as a neutral really getting behind inspiring performances like this, it's very good, I think, overall. And again, this is a game where there was only 1 point in the balance. There are a lot of players that were well and truly in the discussion of being named best on ground, but a lot of them are going to miss out. And I think it would be due diligence time to speak about those who have missed out and upset a few people. First of which is Luke Davies-Uniacke. 31 disposals, 61% disposal efficiency let him down. 391 metres gained, 16 of his 31 were contested, 7 clearances, 3 marks, 10 score involvements, 5 tackles. Jack Crisp, 27 disposals, 77% efficiency, 11 of the 27 were contested, 6 clearances, 8 score involvements, 7 tackles. Zach Fisher has 24 with 79%. We have still Sidebottom, 23 at 60% with the 6 tackles and the 8 score involvements. Bailey Scott had another great game. Josh Dacos had another great game, but the man of the moment, I'm telling you right now, on the radio, I'm not making this up, this is verbatim what was said. I think it was Dale Thomas, I think it was Daisy, turned around and said that at 3/4 time, when Will Phillips was taken off the field, now Will Phillips, let's have a look at his stats and get his stats up real quick. He had 13 disposals at 84%. He had 5 score involvements, 2 tackles, 3 clearances. Now, probably a miss to think, okay, up until 3/4 time, he's only had 13 disposals. So, yeah, good, sub him off, no worries. So many players underneath him that could have well and truly been subbed off ahead of him, especially for the likes of Jaden Stephenson, who got unloaded onto the ground for that sub. The fact that he got not traded, but substituted off rather. See, I'm fumbling my words because I'm so upset. He was tagging Nick Dacos with a hard tag, and Nick Dacos' influence was almost non-existent up until 3/4 time. And then, as I said, his final quarter performance was absolutely sensational. One of the best final quarter performances that we have seen from any player this year. Now, he comes out He has 29 disposals with 6 clearances and 2 goals, which obviously is a typical kind of Nick Dacos kind of day. But to think that majority of that influence didn't come until after Will Phillips was taken off the field. Daisy Thomas turned around and said whoever okayed that sub to be made should hand in their credentials and never be allowed in the coach's box again. And people were saying, oh, you know, Alistair Clarkson's a 3-time premiership coach. No. He fumbled the ball. As far as Amy clangers go, the clanger here was substituting Will Phillips off, because you don't substitute someone off who is taking out one of the most influential players in the game today and letting him run rampant at the end of the game. I can't get my head around it. I really can't. I think that's where the game was lost. I think if they leave Will Phillips on the field and don't let Nick Dacos get off the chain like he did, North Melbourne could have very well walked away with this game. But 3-2-1. Now that we've discussed that and I've gotten a little bit of the angries out of me, the one vote I am giving to Bobby Hill. He had a huge game. As I said, he had the 5 goals along with 10 disposals at 60%, had 7 marks for the game as well, 8 score involvements, laid the 1 tackle. I just feel that when the moment was to be won and the game was there, Bobby Hill stood up tall and definitely was one of Collingwood's best on the day. The 2 vote to me in a losing effort goes to George Wardlaw, and this performance now has people wondering whether or not he is now the favourite to win the Rising Star, given the fact that Harley Reid and Sam Darcy are both ineligible. I would love to see him play more consistently at this level, because he had a huge game. 30 disposals at 70% efficiency, 470 metres gained. 10 of his 30 were contested. 6 clearances, 6 marks, 1 goal, 3 goal assists, 10 score involvements, and 3 tackles. Best on ground for me, though, as I just said. The final quarter from Nick Dacos, when the game is on the line and you're 9 goals down and you can almost single-handedly get yourself involved in everything in that final quarter, was hard to look past him, really. 29 disposals at 65% efficiency, 490 metres gained. 18 of his 29 were contested, 6 clearances, 2 goals, 2, 3 goal assists, 10 score involvements, and 2 tackles. Is Nick Dacos now going to be making a late charge for the Brownlow? And it's going to be interesting, because Isaac Heaney, I think, at least according to how I've been voting here, and I try to maintain this as best as I can according to who I actually think is best on. So Isaac Heaney, to me, at this point in time, should be leading the Brownlow. But Nick Dacos is making a very late charge, and so is Marcus Bontempelli in my eyes. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this game, you know, at the end of the season comes down to it all. The game being the Brownlow, that is. Because Nick Dacos is making a huge charge late. And the final game of the round was at NG Stadium with GWS hosting Port Adelaide in a very inaccurate game of football. It was so inaccurate that if you combined the amount of goals both teams kicked, Port Adelaide had the same amount of behinds kicked total for the game. It is ridiculous to think that either team combined kicked more behinds than kicked more goals than either team kicked behinds. See, I'm mumbling and jumbling every fucking thing, because this game, in so many retrospects, was incredibly scrappy and boring, and I really disliked watching this game purely because of the scrappiness. Like, I don't mind a scrappy game of football, but when there is just constant misses on goal, and you know that there is a level of talent, that's probably where this game fell short, because both teams are so star-studded in certain areas that I think we hold them in too high a regard to when they do dish up this kind of performance, we feel let down. I don't know whether that makes sense or not, but GWS 9 goals 19, 73, defeated Port Adelaide 6-15-51. Very, very hard to watch this one, but at the end of the day, GWS are breathing new life back into their campaign for the 2024 season. Port Adelaide continued to disappoint, and I don't know if they miss finals this year whether or not Ken Hinkley should keep his job. I honestly think The fact that he keeps getting re-signed when they have failed to deliver speaks volumes about the mindset at Port Adelaide. And I've made a joke in running weeks. Every week that Port Adelaide have lost, I've always taken to social media saying that Koshi has gone and signed a new contract with Ken Hinkley to extend him for longer. But unfortunately, that's the fucking reality. That's exactly what is going down, because I feel for a team that has gone as far as a prelim and then continues to get eliminated each and every year. There should be questions asked as to why they haven't been able to take the next step. Maybe a new fucking coach could take you on the next step. I don't know. That's just my opinion. Having a look here, though, it was some players that you would expect to have more influence on the game that were probably the bigger culprits in making this game a lot more scrappier than it should have been. Toby Green for GWS kicks 5 behinds off of his own boot. He kicked a goal at the end of the game that pretty much sealed it, but before then, just the wayward goal kicking was a little bit concerning. And I know a lot of people are still talking about how good of a year he's been having. I don't see it. I think he's definitely having a down year on output. It was good to see Tom Green get back to his best after a couple of weeks that have been very, very wayward, very off by his standards. When we turn our attention to the stats, there's again just a disparity between the top performing players and then the drop off with other players on the ground. Players that have played a full game that have hardly gotten their hands on the ball. Quinton Narkle was the starting sub for Port Adelaide. He has 4 disposals for the game. But you think about players that have played all game. Ivan Soldo, he has 6 touches. Todd Marshall has 8. Jed McKenty has 8. Willem Drew only has 9 when he's been a better performer for Port all year. Georgiades has 9. 11 for Burn Jones. 11 for Zirk Thatcher. Miles Bergman only has 14. Rosie only has 14. Some very down efforts. And then you have a look and it's, the same people from GWS popping up and having huge numbers and having more influence. And at the end of the day, I think that was the deciding factor. It was the fact that GWS as a whole were able to knuckle down when it really came to it and get their hands on the ball first, and Port Adelaide afforded them way too much space around the ground. As far as players that didn't get votes that should get spoken about, probably Kane Farrell from Port Adelaide, 30 disposals at 80%, 768 metres gained, 4 of the 30 were contested, 2 clearances, 6 marks, 2 score involvements. But again, Farrell likes to lay a tackle every now and again, and this week he didn't lay a fucking one. Who else? Lockie Whitfield, 28 disposals at 89%. No, he's getting votes. I'm not going to talk about him. Scratch that. Let's move on. We're going to talk about Cullen Ward, 23 disposals at 87%. 3 clearances, 4 marks, 4 score involvements, 4 tackles. Like an old fella like him still getting around, getting the job done. Jake Riccardi plucks 12 marks for the game. Doesn't kick a goal, but still gets his hand in and around the contest. Toby Green, as I said, has 18 disposals for the game, so he gets himself around the ground. Only ran at 50% and kicks 5 behinds. Gets plenty of the ball, but he hasn't been using it all that well this year. I don't know. Even Zach Butters was a bit down. Only had 17 disposals at 58% efficiency. He ran at a lesser output compared to players like Brent Daniels. Sam Taylor out of full back played a better game. Now, interesting to note too, Sam Taylor in between round 14 and round 15. Ruptured testicle, will not be playing for the rest of the season. That's fucking, just hearing the 2 words, ruptured testicle, makes my testicles shrivel up and not want to fucking see the light of day again. Let's move on before I lose my testicles completely and I never see them again. The 1 vote for this game I'm giving to Josh Kelly. 27 disposals, 74% disposal efficiency, 640 metres gained. 8 of the 27 were contested. 1 clearance, 1 clearance for Josh Kelly, but he's an outside player. 4 marks, 1 goal, 1, 9 score involvements, and the 1 tackle. The 2 votes, and I accidentally mentioned him before, Lockie Whitfield, 28 disposals at 89% efficiency, 444 metres gained, 7 of his 28 were contested, 4 marks, 2 score involvements, but 9 tackles for the game, defensively sound, I love it. Best on ground though, in a losing team, was hard to look past Dan Houston as best on ground for this game. 35 disposals, 85% disposal efficiency, 792 metres gained, 7 contested of the 35, 3 clearances, 4 marks, 3 goal assists, 6 score involvements, 5 tackles. It was hard, this one, because even Tom Green missed out on votes with 30 disposals, but he ran at 60%, didn't lay many tackles. He got plenty of the ball, but he didn't really seem to use it all that much. I don't know, it's just, this was overall very hard to watch because there are players of certain caliber that you expect more out of, and I think that they just failed to live up to that hype. So it was kind of easier to kind of pick and choose ones that stood out above the rest, because there were some that glaringly stood out more than others. I don't know. As I said, feel free to fucking let me know in the comments down below if I fumbled it. So as it stands after round 14, this is how our ladder is looking. Do bear in mind, as I said, round 14 was the second last round of the buys. Round 15 is the final round. Thank fuck for that. Our top 4 after round 14 see Sydney in first place, still 3 games clear of the next best, which is Carlton. Collingwood tied for second place, both on equal amount of points, but keeping them separated by about 2%. And Essendon rounding out the top 4. GWS, Geelong, Port Adelaide and Fremantle round out the top 8. Bulldogs, Gold Coast, Melbourne and Hawthorn still all a win out of the top 8, trailed by Brisbane and St Kilda, with the bottom 4 being Adelaide, West Coast, Richmond and North Melbourne. With the round officially recapped, it is time, before we wrap things up officially, to look at the leaderboard for the Hip and Shoulders MVP award for the 2024 AFL season. I'm going to rattle off my top 10. I think that's probably where we're going to be at moving forward, and I know this isn't how an official count would go down, because, for example, if there was a tie for second, then essentially who would be in third is now fourth, according to the count. But I'm just going to do it based on the total amount of votes. So if there is a clumped amount of players all on the same amount of votes, say in 10th, they're all going to get equal 10th, and then we work up to 9th. That's how I'm doing it, okay? We can do things my way here. So in 10th place, all on 10 votes apiece, we have Brodie Grundy, Lockie Whitfield, Elliot Yeo, Max Holmes, and Christian Petrarca. Of that bunch, Christian Petrarca will not get any more votes moving forward because he is done for the season with an injury that, unfortunately, is going to see him out for the rest of the year. And it's a bit disappointing to see him go down and not return. I think Melbourne should be held more accountable for the fact that they played him after this injury went down. But hey, that's not my role to be talking about. In 9th place on 11 votes, we have Patrick Cripps. A lot of people probably would think that he's probably gotten unders from me this year. I just haven't rated his input as highly as others. And again, Carlton fans are probably going to drag me for it. In 8th place, tied on 12 votes apiece, we have Errol Goulden, Jordan Dawson, Chad Warner, Max Gawn, and Jack Steele. In 7th place, we have tied on 13 votes, Matt Rowell, Sam Walsh, Zach Butters, and Tom Green. And in 6th place, we have Isaac Rankin on 14 votes. Now for the top 5. In 5th place, on 15 votes, we have Lockie Neal, who has been making a late charge. In 4th place, on 17 votes, another player who has been making a late charge is Marcus Bontempelli, as well as his teammate Adam Treloar. In 3rd place, on 19 votes, we have Caleb Sarong. In 2nd place, on 23 votes, we have a tie between Zach Merritt and Nick Dacos. And in 1st place, on 30 votes and 7 votes clear at this point in time, is Isaac Heaney. Now, I'm not at all suggesting that the Brownlow is going to be this one-sided at this point of the season. There could be games where Isaac Heaney doesn't get votes where I've voted. There could be games where Zach Merritt doesn't get votes where I've voted. But that's how I've got it so far. Isaac Heaney leads it from Zach Merritt and Nick Dacos as our top 3. Well, and Caleb Sarong as our top 3. Get it? Good. Thank you for joining me for round 14's edition of the Round Recap podcast. Even though it is a week late, I do apologize yet again. The next video you catch on this channel will be the Round 15 podcast, which I'm hoping will drop in a couple of days' time. So double the dosage of podcast for you. How exciting! Do hit that like button down below if you enjoy what I've been doing here. It does go a long way to helping myself out, and I cannot thank you guys enough for all the support you guys have shown me so far. if you do want to continue to help myself out a little bit further and you haven't already, hit that subscribe button as well and get on board the community that I'm wanting to build. I'm wanting to build a very passionate and like-minded community of AFL lovers and supporters that can come and just hang out and have a good time and discuss our great game. If you fit the bill, just hit the subscribe button. It's that easy. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.